Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Double Tap on YouTube. And today, Shaun, we're going to talk about dating. Not you and I, though.
Oh, well, so don't put anything off the table, Stephen Scott. You know, we are married on the show virtually.
That's right. You are my work wife. That is very true. Listen, with us today, we have a fantastic guest who I'm so pleased is here to talk about her own experience of online dating, but, you know, generally about the experience. And I think, you know, around this time of year, around what I call lovey-dovey time, Valentine's Day, it's a nice chance to think about, you know, the ways we can date as blind and low vision people. With us here today is someone who's well known to the AMI family and for many BBC listeners to In Touch and other programs as well. You will know Fern Lulham. It's great to have you here with us, Fern, today.
Hello, Stephen. I feel like a bit of a third wheel already here now. This is a story of my life, to be honest. But thank you very much for having me.
Not at all. Please save us. That is why you're here. Save us, please. You need to move to that number 2 position very quickly. Listen, it's great to have you here. You know all about online dating. It's not an area, I have to be honest, it's not something I've ever done, ever tried. I'm old enough to remember the days when I used to start online conversations with A/S/L. If you're old enough, remember that? Yeah. If you're old enough to remember that, then yeah, well, you're old. But that was kind of age, sex, location was the first thing you'd always type in, right? And that was to kind of, I don't know, I guess, get a conversation going. Weirdly enough, everybody was 27. Don't know why that was. Everybody seemed to be 27. Don't know why, but there you go. But online dating has changed a lot, and it's certainly become, from what I remember back in the day, being something that people were quite shy about, almost ashamed to talk about, to kind of being the place to go, right? The place to go, and almost the norm today.
Yeah, I think so. I saw a survey back in 2019, which is now 5 years ago now. A third of people were using online dating to meet their partner, and I'm sure that's only skyrocketed with the pandemic and everything else. So yeah, it's the place to be.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, the pandemic. I mean, that's right. I guess, though, is it different for disabled people? We're always a bit ahead of the curve when it comes to technology, and I imagine online dating maybe something that disabled people maybe get into first?
Perhaps so. I think for me, the main reason for using it is I can't do any of the eye contact stuff, you know, that you can do just to dip your toe in the water. Like, are they looking at me? Are they giving me the vibes? I can't do any of that. So I just thought, let's cut all of that out, cut to the chase and start chatting to somebody. That's why I chose it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's just a practicality there, right? It's so much more difficult if you're blind and visually impaired and other disabilities as well, to make that first interaction, to pick up on those signs, those signals. So online dating makes total sense. But there's always that safety concern for me with online dating.
Yeah, I know what you mean in terms of safety. I think it can be a bit of a... I suppose the thing is, for a long time, that was the main thing that you heard, wasn't it? You know, it's not safe, you don't know who you're meeting, all of that kind of stuff. And I think you need to keep that in mind, but it didn't stop me, you know, and I'm still here to tell the tale. So there you go.
Yeah, you survived.
Make of that what you will.
Talk us through that experience, because you did go out into the world of online dating and make it sound like you're some kind of exhibit in some museum. It's like, let's examine this exhibit here that's done this thing. But, you know, you did.
Not the first time, Stephen.
But you tried the online dating thing. Talk us through that experience, what it was like. Talk us about the apps, websites, whatever it was that you were using, because I think that's what's always intriguing to us as blind people. What services are out there that are available to us?
Yeah, so I used a couple of different services. I always remember I used Plenty of Fish, and I tried both the paid services and the non-paid, and what I kind of found was that personally, I didn't see much difference between them. It wasn't, you know, like you can easily assume that, well, if you're paying, you're going to get a better experience. I didn't really think so. And I think the main reason for that is because people are just people. Wherever you are, you're still meeting people, you know, and we're all flawed and we all have our own pros and cons and all that kind of stuff. So I used Plenty of Fish, like I said. I think I tried eHarmony. eHarmony is the one with all the questions. There's loads of questions for you to answer. But, you know, it's kind of like no pain, no gain. If you get through all the questions, then maybe you'll find somebody who's more compatible to you because they've kind of matched you up in that way. I think that's still how it works. So I feel like, maybe I'm out of the game now. But the one that I had success on, which I met my partner on, was Bumble, which is where the ladies start the conversation.
Okay, that's an interesting way of doing it. So what's the concept behind that? Is that down to safety reasons or?
Well, I'm not sure if it's safety, but I think quite often maybe what happens is ladies, I've heard that, obviously we're talking heterosexually here, but I've heard that quite often men find it quite a lot harder to get attention on online dating than women do. And quite often women are just flooded with loads of messages because quite often guys will just literally send a message to everyone and just see who replies, and Josh even said, my partner even said, that's what he did. Just, shoot your shot to as many people as you can and someone maybe will get back to you. It's a numbers game, basically. With women, apparently we're more picky and we're like, oh, well, I don't know. So I guess this is where Bumble sort of thought, okay, well, if we make the women start the conversation, then she can't just be flooded. The men have just got to wait their turn until somebody comes and starts the conversation with them. So as a man or a woman, you can match each other, but it has to be the woman that makes the first move and starts the conversation, or at least it was when I was using the app. I don't know if it's changed since.
I don't want to get all nanny state on you, but this is the thing that terrifies me, is that you must get so many messages. How do you pick out of that who to respond to? Because how did you get to Josh?
Oh, well, yes, I was absolutely inundated. But I
don't doubt it.
It became like a second admin job, but I basically, you just sift through. I mean, a lot of them you can just write off immediately. And this is going to sound harsh, but it's true, because a lot of them will just be saying quite inappropriate things. And maybe this is another reason that the Bumble people came up with what they came up with, because a lot of them will just be kind of like sexual advances. And this is the first message, so... Okay, so then there'll just be some people that you just don't click with, even just over messages. So, it'll just be a very hard-going conversation. You can always tell, can't you, where there's someone that you just hit it off with and you back and forth like a tennis match. But some conversations just feel like you're running up a really steep hill, because you come back with something, you're like, oh, how are you? I'm fine. Oh, right. And you're just constantly trying to get some kind of momentum, and it's just not happening. So again, you're just not going to go to those people. In terms of Josh, it's really an interesting one, because I think on his profile it said something about he was a sound producer, and of course, my work in audio, I thought, wow, this is this could be the one. But there was another part of me, because I'd been doing online dating for quite a while at that point, and there was another part of me that was thinking, when you think, oh, this looks like the perfect match, usually it means it's not going to go anywhere because it's too perfect, right? It's too this is going to be the one. It never is. So actually, weirdly, in my head, I thought this isn't going to be the one. And also, he lived in Whitstable in Kent, which is about an hour and a half away from me. And I'd had lots of previous experiences with people who liked me a lot, but lived so far away they just couldn't be bothered to make the commute. And I can't drive, so that's not helpful. And so for those two reasons, I thought this isn't going to happen. That was actually made worse by the fact that when Josh turned up on our first date, the very first thing, or at least one of the first things he said to me was, God, that was a long way. And I thought, well, should we just call it a day now? Because this is not going to go anywhere.
Forget
5
it.
years down the road, here we are.
Wow. 5 years. That's incredible. So 5 years ago that you started out on this journey, a lot, like you say, will have changed, right? I mean, Shaun, I'm thinking immediately about AI. That surely it's going to be able to make the whole experience of matching people a little bit easier, right? Because it can get more detail about you.
I mean, we're saying that a lot. Computer dating's been around a long time, and I don't know how proven that's been. I think it's all about the connection, isn't it? Just getting people together. And I think it's interesting that you've chosen there, or the examples you gave there, Fern, were, I'm assuming they're all mainstream, right? Plenty of Fish, Bumble,
Yeah.
eHarmony.
Yeah. I didn't use any disability-specific sites myself.
Because there are lots of people that always ask this question. I see it a lot, is when do I disclose I'm disabled or my disability? Do I put it out in my profile, in my bio, or do I wait until the first date? Surprise! I mean, it's a difficult question. I don't know if there's a clear answer to it.
That was the million-dollar question for me, and it caused me so much agony, emotional agony, in terms of thinking, like, what do I do? And I tried all different things. So my first thought process with it was, well, I don't need to tell them before the date, because every time I've met other people in the past before I was doing online dating, I never went up to them and went, "Hi, I'm Fern, I'm blind." So they kind of just got to know me and went, "Oh, I don't think she can see," And so I thought, well, the same principle can apply here. I just won't tell them, and then they'll figure it out when we get together. That didn't work very well, because basically most of the people that I met, and this is, I'm not exaggerating, most of the people I met when I was using that strategy, I never saw again, because they could clearly tell that something wasn't quite right, but I don't think they could quite work out what it was, So you'd go to a coffee shop and I wouldn't be able to see the menu, or I'd always kind of linger behind them because I didn't want to walk up to a table that already had someone sitting at it. All of those things that you're kind of trying to manage, and you're trying to pretend almost to be sighted, because I think this was still at the part where I was too nervous to kind of just come out and be like, "Oh yeah, I can't see." So I was sort of hedging my bets, and trying to act like I could see, which isn't easy when you can't see. If either of you have ever tried that, I'm sure you know. And also you're on a date where you're already nervous. So that didn't go very well, basically. And what I started to think, and I got a lot of advice from friends who said, well, just put it on your profile, and if they don't like you, that's on them, you go girl kind of chat. And the thing about that a lot of these friends, I'm going to be blunt, I would look at them and I would think, do you know what? You say that, but I think if you were on a dating site and someone did that, you would probably be swiping the other way. So, if I think that about you, I don't know. And a lot of people haven't met a blind person or a visually impaired person. And so through no fault of their own, they have a lot of stereotypes, misconceptions, that's the only thing that they can go on, because they have no other information. I have some sympathy around this, for people, because why would they know? Why would they know what you're capable of, or if they can cope with you, or whatever? And they might, because they have these wrong ideas, they might just go, I can't deal with this, and that's the end of that. So I chose not to put it on my profile, but what I would do as like a compromise, I would kind of drop it into conversation. Once we started chatting on messages, I would kind of drop it in and say so, and I try and make it like a bit cheeky, like, "Oh, and by the way, my sight's not very good, so I might use that as an excuse to hold your hand," or like trying to make it all flirty. But there is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Giggle.
You can get away with that, And so the hardest thing about that still is when you send that message and that you've kind of just given a little something away, you've been a bit vulnerable, and waiting for the response. Like, are they going to reply at all? Like, maybe you've just killed the connection entirely. Are they going to say, is the tone going to completely change of their conversation? You realize, oh, actually, they're not interested anymore. Are they going to say something quite mean? Because actually, online dating, we all know that when you're behind a screen, you behave in a different way than you probably would if you were in person. So it's that moment of like, oh, what are they going to say? Waiting for that message back. And if anyone has ever been in that situation, they know what that's like, that heart-stopping, every second feels like an eternity when you're waiting for that message back.
I think that's probably the best way to handle it, though, because otherwise it does seem like, as you said, living in the real world, most people are going to see, blind or disabled and think, okay, let's swipe on. And it's harsh, but it probably is the reality. And it's always that thing of, getting to know the person rather than the disability that we hear a lot. But it's so true. And I think, if you go the other way and say nothing until you actually meet in person, I think there's a feeling of being dishonest with someone, and I can understand that as well. So,
can I ask you, Fern? I want to ask you about the dating sites, because we kind of I wanted to ask you this at the time. You mentioned that you went to essentially mainstream sites. You didn't seek out disability dating services. Now, was that because there just weren't many options, or because you didn't want to go down this route? Because you know what I'm asking you, right? Which is that ultimate question that all blind people seem to have this debate internally about, which is, do I want to date someone who is disabled or not? That's a big question as well in our lives, right? Which some people are very up for answering. Some people feel very nervous about answering. Where do you stand? Not that I'm putting you on the spot, you understand?
No, of course, you would never dream of it, would you, Stephen? I think that is a really good point, because it's very easy, like I say, to have that kind of attitude of, if they don't like you for your disability, then that's on them. But to be honest, let's really just say it as it is. Even as disabled people, some of us may think, I don't want to date a disabled person, because I've got enough going on of my own. I don't need, somebody else's as well. So, yeah, that does come into it. And I would say that I wasn't adverse to, dating a disabled person, but I didn't want to just cut that option off of dating somebody who didn't have a disability. I kind of wanted a bit of everyone, so I thought mainstream would be the best way to go, because I kind of just didn't want to put myself in a box. And I think also when I started out, I didn't want to kind of play into that idea that if you're disabled, you must date another disabled. Because I had that when I started dating Josh. Hilariously, I pulled up to work in Josh's car. Josh was driving. I didn't pull up to work. Josh dropped me off at work. He was driving the car, just to make that absolutely clear. I got out the car. And later on, I heard that two of my colleagues had a conversation like, they obviously knew that was my new boyfriend. And one of them had said to the other, oh, do you think he's blind as well? Which he was driving a car, so I don't think he was. Yeah. But I say that to say that notion is so ingrained in people that if you're disabled, you would date another disabled person, that even when the evidence is screaming in your face that clearly that's not the case, it's still like, well, that must be the case, because, that's how it works.
And it's funny, because I think about it from my own point of view. I remember having this conversation. I went to a mainstream secondary school, which, we had a visual impairment unit. And one of the conversations we'd have in the unit quite a lot was who we'd like to date, who we'd think we'd marry in the future, right? It was just one of those things you have a chat about at school in those years. And I remember being quite forthright and saying, I will not ever date a disabled person. It will never happen. And almost everybody I dated was disabled. And I never intended it to that. And then my wife is blind, or at least low vision, as she would say. And, I think that's so interesting that you at the end of the day, you can't help who you fall in love with. You can't help who you end up with, who you end up falling for, right? It becomes irrelevant. So, but obviously you've got to start somewhere. That's the point, right?
Yeah, of course. And what I would say is, I think all of us can stand to have an open mind, because even if it's not disability, and I'll give you a case in point, Josh, actually at the time, I can't remember if it said this on his profile, but he was a DJ. And I am somebody who likes an early night, isn't about that rowdy nightlife. I think I could have judged him on that and gone, oh, well, he's going to be all the women all over him all the time. You can't trust him. And that's not Josh. Josh is many things, but he is not that. He is like computer, Lego playing, video game enjoying, geeky guy, which, that's fine.
Sounds cool.
Exactly. It's just what I wanted. But I could have just gone, no, I'm not going to go, because we all have that bit of judgment, don't we? And so we just all need to say, maybe I need to explore this and see if what I think is true is actually true.
Yeah, absolutely. Those preconceptions we've all got. It's very interesting. So have you come off all those sites now?
I should hope so.
Don't tell Josh. Only the ones that Josh doesn't know. Of course I have. I come, or any of them that I use are purely for research purposes only, of course, for reports and whatnot.
Yeah, that's a good line. Yeah, I've used that line a few times in my life, I must admit. Question is though, in that research, because I know you do talk about this, and you've done reports on this in the past, and you've talked about it. What's the difference today, do you think, in the apps? And I know accessibility is obviously the big question for most of us.
Well, I know that they have much more features now, like audio messaging and video calls, and I think that's really good because then it doesn't just rely on looking at pictures and reading text, which, it can be challenging. Because I always remember when I was on it, the text some of these sites use in the messaging, you couldn't make it bigger. It was just tiny. And I would have to copy and paste it onto clipboards to try and reply to them because they were too small. But I think on the point of this idea of video calls and audio, I think that's a really good thing because that's the strategy I started to employ before I would meet people. Because it takes a long time to get ready for a date. You got to polish up. You got to actually get out of your pajamas for once in your life. This is a big deal, right? So you don't want to do all of that, which I did so many times, just to, in the first 5 minutes, think, well, this was not the right, you were a really good writer. You sounded great in your, in your texting, but in person, not the case, which happens a lot. So have a phone call or a video call and just see if actually when you're talking as opposed to texting, because you could just get your mate. That's what I thought a lot of times. I thought, has this person just got somebody else to write their messages? Because they don't match their messages. So if you actually have a chat, see if the chemistry is flowing between you when you're actually talking to them rather than just messaging them.
One final question in regards to the safety question. I think it's an interesting comparison, and because from your perspective as a woman, I'm intrigued by this. Is there a difference being a blind woman meeting someone in a pub? How can I ask? Let me ask this another way. If you're a blind woman in a pub, and you meet someone, do the safety concerns, are they the same as far as you're concerned as meeting someone online? What I mean by that is you can't see them in the pub. You don't know what they look like. You don't know them necessarily by visual features. So is there any major difference between that and the online, do you think?
I suppose, yeah, that's a really good point. I suppose there isn't that much difference. I guess online, you can literally say you are whoever, and you might be able to pick up on some cues in person, even if you can't really see them very well. But I think you just have to know, you just have to have your wits about you, I think. I always made sure I meet the person in an area that I was really used to. So I'd always meet kind of in my hometown. I would never go to them first time just because I'm comfortable here. I know where I'm going. I'd always meet in the daytime and have a coffee. Also, because coffees don't last as long if it's not going well, you can leave. That's an aside. Always tell someone where you're going, just the basic things. And just take it slow. And I think that's all you can do, which is very similar to if you meet someone in a pub. I would say a lot of times people say, oh, people are so judgmental online and it's such a big risk online. But actually, I think you make a really good point, Stephen, that it's true whether you're meeting someone in person or whether you're meeting online. There are risks to both. There are judgments in both. It's not like everyone walks around in the real world not judging each other at all. We know that's not true. So, I think people can be very harsh on online dating. And I think as long as you have that in the back of your mind, and like I say, just be aware of it, then I think all we can do is what we can do to keep ourselves safe. And then the rest of it is kind of just putting it in the hands of fate.
And of course, the great thing is because you've had this online relationship, it means when Valentine's Day comes around, you can just send each other an e-card and save the hassle of an actual card and flowers and all that nonsense.
Yeah, we haven't actually met in person. We're still just communicating, over. I think that's the best way to have
still an email.
Yeah, exactly. That's the best
have
relationship.
A relationship.
Yeah. I think that works. Fern, thank you so much for coming on, as always. You got to come back on soon because I know you've just qualified as a psychotherapist. Is that right?
I have. So I know all your secrets now.
Wow.
Now I'm
Well,
worried.
I have to say, I'm probably an open book, so you could probably tell anything you want from me. Shaun, on the other hand, I don't know. I don't think there's much there.
There's nothing. I'm an empty book.
Oh, Shaun.
Sorry.
Fern, thank you for coming on. Fern Lulham, of course, friend of AMI, and of course on BBC. You'll find her on In Touch and other programmes as well on the BBC. Well worth checking out. Thank you so much for coming on today to Double Tap on YouTube.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This is great.
And we'll catch you again next time for another Double Tap on YouTube. Like, subscribe, do the commenting thing, and there's something about a bell which apparently tells you when the next episode comes. Look, whenever someone figures out how to get the next episode up, it will be here. Catch you next time.